Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, I wanted to give you a tier list for the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Period. That means, without a ban list, without anything like that, what would be the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, as well as just in Yu-Gi-Oh! In general. What is going to be the best decks, what is going to perform the best, etc., etc. This is all speculation, with some minor implications from the OCG no ban list tournament that was held. Now, here's the thing. In the OCG, they have a very, very silly rule where if your opponent does not agree to a concession, you cannot concede, which mattered. Because basically that meant that Dragon Link became the best deck, because what it did was it, turn 1, set up a combo, prevented your opponent from playing the game, basically, and then on turn 3, on their next turn, what they would do is they would set up this combo that allowed them to special summon Victory Dragon from the deck with LP, and then attack you for lethal with Victory Dragon, winning the match. All they had to do was win the die roll, basically. That's more or less all you had to do, because of how insanely consistent a lot of these decks were. So, with that in mind, yeah, just kind of it was just an FTK, basically. As long as you win first, you just FTK the opponent. And it would be a match FTK as well. Which is insane. I'm not going to take that into consideration because that is a dumb-ass rule that should not have existed. And the fact that it does exist in the OCG is insane. If you concede, you concede. So, Victory Dragon should not have any implications in this game in any capacity. So I do not believe that something like Dragon Link will be just definitively the best deck because of that little rule. So we're actually going to take that out of the running, and or not just entirely out, but we're gonna talk about that later. I'm gonna go through everything with that in mind. So we're starting off here with Adamancipator. Also tier 0, tier 1 can compete, Rogue, and can't compete. The reason I did tier 0 is just because obviously all of these decks are insane with no ban list. Some of them are better than others, as you will very, very quickly see, or at least in my mind. It's hard to say because, again, we have very little to go off of, and on those tournaments that they did in the OCG, I think there was like 2. So there wasn't a whole lot to go off of. There may have been, I think maybe there were 4, but there wasn't a whole lot to go off of. So there's that. Starting off, though, with Adamancipator, I do think that I'm going to put this, maybe in tier 1. I think this deck is very, very strong with no ban list. Being able to cycle block dragons, being able to, like, set up really just, like, degenerate boards. I've seen being able to go into, like, barrier statues and stuff like that with Rotten and the like is obviously very, very strong, and being able to just, like, do that consistently. The problem is playing through hand traps while also being able to beat like a myriad of different like massive blowout cards and stuff like that. You literally just kind of have to FTK your opponent, at least in these no ban list kind of formats. So while I don't know, Adamancipator is kind of crazy because it just can do like whatever it needs to as a crazy combo deck. So I'm going to put it in tier 1. Very strong, but not insane by any means. That sounds weird, but I would probably maybe put it at like the bottom of tier 1. Branded is like, I'm going to put it in Rogue for now. I'll talk about this, I was going to say a little bit later, but the thing is, like, your Branded just doesn't really do a whole lot. It's a very fair game, right? Even with, like, things like Maxi and the like, you know, oh, I can play around Maxi, who cares? Just deck your opponent out. Like, there are so many ways to do that. There are so many ways to just, like, entirely destroy your opponent's hand and prevent them from even doing anything. It's like, yeah, you could just also play Branded. Woohoo. Like, no, who cares? I'm going to put it... actually can't compete. Branded just doesn't really have enough. Yes, it could, like, oh, it can gimmick puppet lock you. And it's like, that's great. However, who cares? If you're not, like, legitimately FTKing, who cares? I don't know. We'll put it in Rogue. Yes, gimmick puppet lock, yada, yada. I don't know. It's fine. Dinosaur. Follow me. Dinosaur can compete. Here's why. Miscellaneousaurus. That's it. Hey, that's a really nice field you have there. It'd be a shame if Miscellaneousaurus were to prevent you from interacting with me in any capacity. And also I have a million blowout cards because I can go second super efficiently. The only problem that I have with this is that while it can also set up an insane board, it also is really good at, you know, blowing out opponents and just like playing a lot of these really strong cards to just wipe opponents' boards, which is why I'm going to put it a little bit higher than Branded, because Branded kind of can't do that as efficiently. However, another thing with Dino is that it's not all that great against things like FTKs, right? But, you know, having a Dark Ruler and a Lightning Storm and stuff like that, and then being able to go full combo is pretty nice. And being able to do that off of a Misk, no, I've even convinced myself it should go lower. It can't compete. It can't. Not really. We'll keep it in Rogue for now, but maybe not. Drytron, there we go. Drytron can compete. Being able to set up Herald with nearly infinite negates is very, very strong. You can also set up Herald with a Herald of Orange Light, or not Orange Light, of Arc Light, which is the one that prevents Droplet. Now, granted, Dark Ruler still exists and stuff like that, you know, Kaijus, etc. But all in all, being able to have an infinite negate is still good. Can't do as much degenerate stuff as like Adamancipator, but still very strong. Eldlich. Eldlich is interesting because being able to set up a stun deck is nice, but I think that there are better stun decks. So for now, I'm going to put it in probably can compete just because it's still a stun deck that works very well. Yeah, that's basically it. You could say like a Runic should be on here, but Runic kind of requires too many spells, and I really don't think it would compete very well in a no banlist format because there are so many just insanely strong cards to out, like Imperial Order, for example, is a card that you would have to play against, most likely. So there you go. Next up, Dragon Link. Dragon Link I want to put in tier 0, even with all of that stuff that I said previously, because it is still that insane of a deck, and can still do Victory Dragon shenanigans if it wants to, but not really. I mean, that's not really going to do much. I'm going to put it in tier 1 for now, but I do think that it is very, very strong and definitely competitive. Flunder can't compete. I don't know why it's here. Same with Invoked. Kashtira can compete. I don't think it's as good because, again, there's so many insane cards. And yes, a Rise Heart is very good, but like Fenris is going to be very strong, period. Even with that being said, I still don't think it's enough. I think the Kashtira boards are nice, but die to a lot of big blowouts and have a lot of ways that like you could just deal with most of that. So it's not insane by any capacity. Labyrinth is maybe Rogue. I know this sounds weird, but like Labyrinth isn't as good of a stun deck as something like Eldlich is. So with more Floodgates at your disposal, you're better off running Eldlich than you are running Labyrinth, because you don't need as many cards for Eldlich as you do for Labyrinth, if that makes sense. So we'll put it in Rogue. Magical Scientist to FTK. Turns out having a consistent FTK is pretty nice, and being able to just go normal summon Magical Scientist and with any sort of protection, you just go, cool, I'm just gonna FTK you. Most consistent FTK, fantastic. There are a million ways to search out this card, especially with Last Will, especially with 1 for 1. I think it's a 1, right? Or is it a 3? I think it's, I don't know. With, triple Pot of Greed, triple Graceful Charity, etc., etc. There are so many ways to just get to this FTK and to do it consistently. And then even if you do get interrupted, like, for example, a Nibiru happens, you're probably still able to do additional stuff on top of that, because you don't need your entire extra deck now to facilitate the FTK. So, there's that. Moving on. Mystic Mine is probably the best stun variant. And even with that being said, I still don't see it being all that great. Maybe it's not the best one. I think there's one better. But I'm gonna put Mystic Mine up here, a little bit higher than Eldlich. Can compete, but not really gonna do anything too interesting. Having more stun capabilities is nice. Like, for example, I was going to say, like, a Imperial Order, but no, that would not help. But yeah, just having, like, more consistency and stuff like that. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this might go lower because people will more likely be able to see their outs, which I would imagine they would be main decking. So I'm actually going to just put this straight up lower. I'm also going to put this lower, and this lower, and this one. There you go. That looks better. Speaking of the best stun deck, have you read Utopia Zexal? Have you read that card? Turns out, that's the best stun deck. Ignore True Draco, or True King of All Calamities, or whatever it may be. That is the most dumb stun card ever. So there you go. Yep, yep, that's it. There you go. Orcust is not going to compete, just straight up. Pendulum also is not going to do anything. Same with Phantom Knights, same with Plants. They're just not going to be able to. The problem is that these decks are too fair. They don't do enough. There's got to be a lot more that your deck is doing. Speaking of which, Prank Kids actually might be able to compete. Maybe a little tiny bitty bit. The reason I say this, having a double Raigeki is pretty good. That is very strong. And it is like a big blowout, stop your opponent from playing the game kind of thing. However, I do think post side deck, it becomes significantly worse. Because if your opponent knows you're playing a big combo fest thing, you're more likely to be blown out by whatever individual card. Yes, that is similar to Drytron. The difference is Drytron can negate a lot of the ways to search or to see that side deck, whereas this deck kind of can't, if that makes sense. So like Drytron, if you set it up and your opponent doesn't end up seeing that out in their hand, you can prevent them from doing that, which may come up a little bit more than something like the Prank Kid stuff, where it's like, oh, if they see that end board, or like that that option to end your board, or to out your board, they will see it and they will out it. There's not a whole lot of ways that you can stop the. Basically, you don't have a lot of like Omni negates to prevent like Pot of Greed and stuff like that. Pearly is good in the fact that adding more consistency to Pearly doesn't matter too much, but adding more ways to see additional non-engine is nice. I don't know. Pearly's kind of weird because I would imagine so many people are playing things like Kaijus and the like, so it's not like that's going to do a whole lot for you because they're just going to see it. Your deck's not really capable of interacting too efficiently with stuff like that. Again, it's just kind of a little bit too fair. But I still think it has a chance. Speaking of which, Salamangreat doesn't. Sky Striker is weird. Because I want to put it pretty high because it does have a way to see a lot of non-engine. But most of that non-engine kind of has to be allocated to like hand traps, specifically, to really slow down the opponent because they can't really deal with a non-simplified game state nearly as effectively. Yeah, we'll just put it in can compete. Sprite can compete, but not all that well. Being able to end on like multiple Toad activations is very, very strong. Being able to have the red and the carrot and all of that stuff with Elf and Sprint and all sorts of fun stuff. Very strong overall. However, even with all of that being said, it's still no competition with like other such insane combo decks. I'm going to put it higher than Drytron though. Very strong, but not insane. However, another deck that absolutely is Spiral. Spiral is just Dragon Link and Adamancipator. That's it. Don't need to say much more about that. Similarly with Super Heavy Samurai, however, I do think that there is specifically a lot more side deck hate that you can utilize as opposed to these guys with Super Heavy. I think Super Heavy does falter a lot more to those side deck options because I don't think it can really set up as strong of a board as something like these that can just like pump out infinite material or just prevent you from playing the game. Sword Soul is just way too fair. Crystron Halka combo stuff is, yeah, it's just insane. There are, imagine all of these, imagine all of them, but just generic stuff that basically ends on the same boards with more room for actual non-engine, if that makes sense. So imagine a consistent deck that ends on the most insane board you've ever seen, with multiple interactions, both in monsters and spells and traps, and has tech cards. Yep. That's what this is. Thank you, Halka. You're loved. Next up, Tear. Tear is the best deck ever printed. It is the most insane thing that has ever consistently seen play. You can deck out your opponent very efficiently. If they activate a Maxi, they might just die because you just deck them out due to the Ishizus. You are able to interact with the graveyard. You're able to utilize your graveyard as another way to interact. You can play on the opponent's first turn with things like Havnus and the Bestials as well. You can also set up similar in nature boards, not quite as strong by any stretch of the imagination, but being able to set up as many points of interaction is very, very nice. Sure, it's not as many Omni Negates and stuff like that, but you can also just stop your opponent from summoning monsters very efficiently. It does have a little bit more of a hard time against back row in particular, but even with that being said, who cares? You have a side deck. You can still play through a lot of that back row as well. And if it is back row, oftentimes you're able to push through it through multiple turns because the deck is just insanely good in the grind game. Why am I even talking about this? Of course it's Tear. Yeah. Honestly, this is the most represented deck in those OCG tournaments, the no banlist ones, because it was the best deck and people had just been playing it for years, so they were comfortable with it. Next up, Thunder Dragon stuff is actually pretty interesting. Being able to end on the Thunder Dragon in particular, I think, allows for a lot of power on that end board, similar to the other ones. But I do think that just adding in the Thunder Dragon engine kind of does hinder your deck, as opposed to just playing pure Dragon Link. Tri-Brigade's too fair. True Draco might be able to compete a little bit, but Masterpiece just isn't enough, if that makes sense. I think that there is a lot that it can do, and being able to play Dino True King or Dino True Draco. Is it Dino True Draco? Just anything True Draco, Zodiac True Draco, etc., is nice, but I really don't think that it's going to be able to compete with just entirely stop you from playing the game, or just play the game at any point in time, or FTK. Unchained is solid. It can play through quite a lot. The problem is it can't play through enough. It also doesn't really end on that great of a board. It's very middle of the road and very specific to current modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! That doesn't end on a whole lot of Omni Negates. Great. That's not going to do a whole lot against a lot of Omni Negates. It's just not. Virtual World, though, I will say, is probably up here as well, because True King of All Calamities at 3. There you go. Yeah, Virtual World with True King is very, very strong. Isolde Dark Warrior is also probably, yeah, tier 0. Here's the thing with the, I'm going to say that this is Dark Warrior combo because most of the time that's what you're going to be doing, because Rongo Nimiad, number 80 something or other, I think it's 86. I could be very wrong. But Rongo is a card that exists that you would have to deal with. And guess what? Imagine not being able to play the game. Yeah, that's kind of it. The only difference is that you can still use spells and traps. So there are some decks that would have the capability of playing through this and being able to at least survive turns to allow for Rongo to eventually die. However, problem, yes, you can deal with the Rongo eventually. However, you can't deal with the rest of the stuff that would then make access code and stuff like that, and just kill you there. And then we have Zodiac's interesting because it's basically just like a whole bunch of materials to kind of go for additional stuff off of a single normal summon. So while Zodiac, a deck individually as Zodiac, wouldn't honestly do all that well, because it is the most splashable of engines, because all it takes is like a rat pier to get like 10 materials, not really, but like quite a bit of materials and like a Drytron on your side of the field. It means that if you don't need your normal summon, this can be one of the best normal summons for you. That being said, why would you do that when you could play like a myriad of other things? Like for example, you play Tier or FTK or, you know, what have you that actually does require your normal summon, right? So I don't think it's insane by any stretch of the imagination, and it's not like the best of the best that you could potentially play in a no ban list format. I do think that it is very strong, given the fact that, yeah, that one normal summon just kind of gets you off to the races. So there you go. There's the list. This is such an interesting idea because we have seen very, very little of what actually would play out in a no ban list format because it's awful. Do you want to know why it doesn't see a whole lot of play? Because it's not fun. Because basically it's just, all right, who won the die roll? Great, you won the die roll. That's the end of the game. Let's move to the next game because you've already won. So that's why you don't really see it a whole lot. The only deck that I could see, this is why Tier is up here, the only deck that I could realistically see being able to play on the opponent's turn and could conceivably go second efficiently and not have it be a hindrance, like Dino, is Tier. Because Tier can actually play on the first turn with things like Kelbeck, with things like Havness, with things like the Bestials, etc., just to like put bodies onto the field if need be, so that at the very least you could just like switch things to attack and go. But even with that being said, who cares in the face of like a Rongo, you know? But I mean, you know, potentially being able to play and stop your opponent is very, very important. So there's that. Yeah. Other than that, this would not be a fun format by any stretch of the imagination. It's just, no, you don't get to play the game, the format. Anyway, that's going to be it for this episode. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy it. If you did, a like is very much appreciated. And if you want to check out more content like this, as well as more Yu-Gi-Oh!, then just be sure to subscribe. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.